The battle for Kyiv was supposed to be a swift and decisive victory for Russia. After invading Ukraine in February 2022, Russian forces quickly advanced towards the capital, hoping to capture it before the West could intervene. But they underestimated the resilience and determination of the Ukrainian army and the people of Kyiv, who put up a fierce resistance against the invaders. The first mistake that Russia made was to assume that Kyiv would fall without much fighting. The city has a population of over 3 million, and many of them are loyal to Ukraine and its pro-Western orientation. They also have a strong sense of historical and cultural identity, as Kyiv is considered the cradle of Eastern Slavic civilization and the birthplace of Orthodox Christianity. Kyiv has been besieged and sacked many times in its history, but it has always survived and rebuilt itself. The second mistake that Russia made was to underestimate the military capabilities of Ukraine. Despite being outmatched in numbers and equipment, the Ukrainian army proved to be well-trained, motivated, and adaptable. They used guerrilla tactics, drones, cyber attacks, and sabotage to harass and slow down the Russian advance. They also received significant assistance from their Western allies, who supplied them with weapons, intelligence, and training. Britain, for example, sent Ukraine air-launched cruise missiles that could hit targets deep behind the enemy lines. Ukraine also had the advantage of fighting on its own territory, knowing the terrain and having the support of the local population. The third mistake that Russia made was to overextend its supply lines and expose its vulnerabilities. As the Russian forces pushed deeper into Ukraine, they faced logistical challenges and shortages of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. They also became more susceptible to attacks from Ukrainian partisans and special forces, who targeted their convoys, depots, and communication systems. One of the most daring operations was a Ukrainian drone strike on an oil storage facility in the Russian border region of Bryansk, which caused a huge fire and disrupted the flow of oil to the front. The fourth mistake that Russia made was to ignore the international pressure and condemnation. The invasion of Ukraine sparked a global outcry and triggered a series of sanctions and diplomatic actions against Russia. The United States and its NATO allies increased their military presence and readiness in Europe, sending troops, ships, and planes to deter further Russian aggression. The European Union imposed economic sanctions on Russia, targeting its energy sector, financial institutions, and key individuals. China and Iran also faced sanctions for violating the trade restrictions and providing support to Russia. The United Nations Security Council condemned Russia's actions and called for an immediate ceasefire and withdrawal. The fifth mistake that Russia made was to miscalculate the human cost and political backlash of the war. The battle for Kyiv turned out to be a bloody stalemate, with thousands of casualties on both sides and massive destruction in the city. The civilian population suffered from shelling, bombing, sniping, and looting. Many people fled their homes or sought shelter in basements and bunkers. The humanitarian situation worsened as food, water, electricity, and medical supplies ran low. The war also sparked protests and riots in Russia itself, as people demanded an end to the senseless violence and questioned Putin's legitimacy. These mistakes have cost Russia a quick win in Kyiv, but they have not deterred its ambition to conquer Ukraine. The war has dragged on for more than a year, with no sign of a peaceful resolution or compromise. Both sides are preparing for a new offensive in the spring, when the weather improves and more weapons arrive. Ukraine is hoping to launch a counterattack with Western help, while Russia is planning to evacuate its workers from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which could signal a possible nuclear strike. The battle for Kyiv is not over yet. It may only be the beginning of a long and brutal conflict. The battle for Kyiv was one of the most intense and decisive moments of the war. It began on April 15, 2023, when Russia launched a massive offensive to capture the Ukrainian capital and end the resistance of the government and the people. The Russian forces, numbering over 100,000 troops, tanks, artillery, and drones, advanced from three directions: north, east, and south. They faced fierce opposition from the Ukrainian army, which had about 50,000 soldiers and volunteers defending the city, along with NATO air support and special forces. The first days of the battle were marked by heavy casualties on both sides, as the Russians tried to break through the Ukrainian lines and reach the city center. The Ukrainians fought back with courage and determination, using guerrilla tactics, anti-tank weapons and improvised explosive devices. They also received help from the local population, who joined the resistance and provided intelligence, supplies and shelter. The turning point of the battle came on April 23, when 2 Russian jets and 2 helicopters were reportedly shot down by Ukrainian air defenses or friendly fire. This incident caused panic and confusion among the Russian command, which ordered a temporary halt to the offensive. The Ukrainians seized this opportunity to launch a counterattack, pushing back the Russians from some key positions and inflicting heavy losses. The battle for Kyiv lasted for another week, until May 1, when Russia announced a unilateral ceasefire and withdrew its forces from the outskirts of the city. The Ukrainians celebrated their victory, which had saved their capital and their sovereignty. The international community praised their valor and resilience, while condemning Russia's aggression and violations of human rights. The battle for Kyiv was not only a military triumph for Ukraine, but also a political and moral one. It showed that Ukraine was not alone in its struggle against Russia, but had the support of NATO, the EU, and other democratic countries. It also showed that Ukraine was not a weak or divided nation, but a strong and united one. The battle for Kyiv inspired millions of Ukrainians to continue their fight for freedom and dignity. In a desperate attempt to assert his control over the Ukrainian regions he illegally annexed last month, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared martial law in 4 of them on Wednesday. The move came as Ukrainian forces continued to push back against the Russian invasion and regain territory from the Kremlin-backed separatists. The 4 regions under martial law are Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia.